Epcot has just completed its long transformation that started all the way back in 2017. The additions of Remy's Ratatouille Adventure, Space 220, Communicore Plaza, and Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind have changed Epcot for worse or for better. But at the front of the park sits the Seas Pavilion. What once was a cornerstone of the park's lineup got almost entirely ignored as the rest of the park changed around it. Even in its current state though, I don't think the Seas Pavilion is the worst at Epcot. But I do think it has the most unrealized potential. Following the opening and success of the Magic Kingdom, the Disney Company was on a mission to honor Walt Disney and help bring his final projects to fruition. The mantra of "what would Walt do" drove the Disney Company forward in the decade following his passing. But Walt's plans for an experimental prototype community of tomorrow were something that only the man with the vision would be able to bring to reality. So instead, after years of turmoil, a theme park was designed that would hopefully inspire guests to dream as big as their former leader.
Walt Disney dreamed of a showplace for the concepts of tomorrow that would never be completed, but always introducing, testing, and demonstrating new ideas, new materials, and new systems. A center for the communication of new concepts that would always be in the state of becoming.
The theme park version of Epcot would combine a place to experience global cultures with a place to experience the cutting edge of technology and celebrate human achievement. In Future World, two pavilions seemed far further along in development than the rest by the time an early model of Epcot was put on display in 1978. The land and the seas were clearly integral to this plan for Epcot and a focus for the new park. However, when Epcot opened in 1982, only the land would be there.
In Walt Disney's original vision of Epcot, the Living Seas was planned to open as part of the first phase in 1982. But as the Imagineers began the initial planning, they soon realized it was going to require a great deal more research and development than any other pavilion in the center. For one thing, it would be the first Disney attraction that would use live animals rather than the famous audio animatronic creatures found at other exhibits. The Disney planners believed wholeheartedly in the dignity of animals and were determined to avoid their exploitation.
The Seas was planned to be there on opening day. However, the plans for it weren't nailed down until too late in the construction process to meet the opening day. Early concepts took a much more fantasy approach, including a dark ride centered around the Greek god Poseidon. Once United Technologies came on as a sponsor though, the plans were reined back drastically, and they took a much more scientific and serious tone, while also ironically cutting back on the large planned research facility. So, needing extra time in development, the Living Seas wouldn't begin construction until 1984, and would finally open to guests 4 years after the park in 1986. Guests visiting the pavilion on opening day would enter between a large sunset mural and sign on rocks that water would splash randomly. Once in the building, you'd end up in a holding area where essentially an ad for United Technologies would play, and it would talk about how much man-made advancements in technology have allowed us to begin to discover the oceans.
So come with us now to discover the sea, a resource so precious that our very existence depends on its health and well-being. A realm shrouded in mystery, yet possessing enormous potential for humanity. And now, from around the world, the men and women of United Technologies invite you to join us as we cross the threshold into the future of the living seas.
After that, you'd be directed into one of two pre-show theaters, where a movie titled The Seas would play. This film took a far more dramatic and documentarian approach to talk about the mystery and magic of the seas, and how the seas ended up leading to life on Earth.
A deluge of such magnitude that the world's greatest waterfalls, flowing together for more than 1 million years, would only just begin to approach its results. For when it finally stopped, the seas had been born. Seas that would make this planet unlike any other within the realm of our knowledge. For it was there, sheltered from cosmic radiation, that the means to support life on Earth was able to emerge.
This film left guests intrigued by the mystery of the oceans and would lead them into the hydrolators. In the hydrolators, sound, vibration, bubbles, and moving walls all gave the illusion that guests were being lowered to the bottom of the ocean. Once they were there, they'd be let off into the loading station for the Caribbean Coral Reef ride. This Omnimover would give guests a tour through the middle of the tank and bring guests into the heart of Seabase Alpha. Seabase Alpha was a large exhibit hall with different modules guests could visit. These modules had interactive experiences and unique views of fish and sea creatures in and around the main tank. Following your trip to Seabase Alpha, you would hop back into another set of hydrolators that would take you back up to the surface and return you to peak Epcot. The living seas fit in perfectly with early Epcot and quickly became a favorite for guests. The narrative story set up by the pre-shows and ride captivated people and encouraged them to explore all of the exhibits found within the Seabase. Disney had successfully built the largest aquarium tank in the world at the time and crafted a story around it that brought guests in. This symbiosis between the show and the reality helped cement the living seas as an integral part of any Epcot visit. Fast forward to 1998, and Epcot's sponsorship model was beginning to show cracks. Horizons had lost its sponsor in 1993, and by 1998 was only open sporadically, and would eventually close the next year. The Living Seas lost United Technologies as a sponsor in 1998 and had no replacement in sight. Unlike Horizons though, this didn't spell doom for the pavilion. It did bring changes though. The holding area pre-show that was United Technologies focused went away, and one of the theaters that was showing the seas closed to create a path for guests to bypass the movie and go right to the hydrolators. Otherwise though, the loss of sponsor didn't affect the pavilion much. That is until the tourism crash that came following 9/11. Without a sponsor to rely on, the Living Seas would see the closure of the sea caps. Instead, guests would now walk from the hydrolators right into Seabase Alpha. The ride system would remain in place, however this was a major blow to the pavilion and left it a shell of its former self. So by this point, it was obvious that the Living Seas was in need of something new. Around this time, there were rumored plans for a reimagining of Epcot called Project Gemini. This would have focused almost entirely on reinventing Future World, but it's good to take rumors like this with a grain of salt, even if it did get a clone of Soarin' correct. In Project Gemini, the Living Seas was due to undergo a transformation into a new under-the-sea pavilion, featuring characters from The Little Mermaid. Ironically, bring back some of the fantasy aspects of the earliest plans for the Living Seas. While even rumored details are sparse, it would seem like the core structure of the pavilion and its shows and exhibits would all remain in place, just with a new coat of mermaid paint. Project Gemini would never come to fruition, and Ariel would eventually swim her way into Magic Kingdom instead. But that didn't stop Disney executives from looking for ways to revitalize and revamp the Living Seas. Coincidentally, at the same time, Disney's best partner in Pixar was about to strike box office gold with the release of Finding Nemo. Nemo was an even more perfect fit for the pavilion, and plans to bring the fish off the big screen and into Epcot were fast-tracked. The first of these plans would open in late 2004, with a new show taking over one of the modules in Seabase Alpha. Turtle Talk with Crush is a live show of a digital puppet of Crush from Finding Nemo, talking and interacting with guests watching. This was fairly innovative for the time, and the techniques used to create this illusion hold up well to this day. Turtle Talk with Crush was an instant success and quickly drew guests back to Living Seas. This is also a total side tangent, but Turtle Talk with Crush would end up getting cloned to California Adventure, Hong Kong Disneyland, and Tokyo Disney Sea. But by this point, Tokyo Disney Sea is the only park aside from Epcot that has it still running. However, the tech for the California Adventure version would end up being donated to the Children's Hospital of Orange County, making it the only Disney attraction that actually operates outside of a Disney park. Anyways, with the success of Turtle Talk being far more than even Disney anticipated, they decided to pull the trigger on a full-blown Nemo invasion of the Living Seas. Everything about the pavilion, even down to the name, was about to get some amount of Finding Nemo added to it. The biggest change would be at the entrance to the now renamed The Seas with Nemo and Friends Pavilion. Walking between the new entrance marquee and mural with characters from the movies leads into a queue that starts on the boardwalk and then leads underwater before bringing guests to the loading area for a new ride called The Seas with Nemo and Friends. as well. For this ride, the previous Omnimover track was extended to take over some of the space previously occupied by the hydrolators and pre-shows, with other space being used for more queue space. Once on the ride, the new track is placed at the start, and in the first scene you see Nemo on a screen swim away from his school with Mr. Ray. This is then followed up by Marlin and Dory setting up and looking for Nemo before running into jellyfish and a horrifying anglerfish. You then encounter Bruce and other sharks alongside Nemo before quickly catching a ride on the EAC with Crush. This brings you through a covered portion of the previous tank viewing scenes. Once you hop off the EAC, you get views into the tank with projections of Nemo and friends on the glass, mixing them into the real tank. Once you exit, you're back in a Seabase Alpha like what was there previously, just with far less of an explicit explanation. Another aspect of the Nemo transformation was a fresh coat of paint throughout Seabase Alpha, in addition to the outside of the pavilion getting this light blue treatment. Inside of Seabase Alpha, Turtle Talk with Crush became so popular that Disney decided that in this transformation they wanted to give it a more permanent space. So Module 1A became the holding area for the show, and some of the former pre-show and hydrolator space ended up becoming a permanent theater. Other modules got swapped around, with exhibits once again taking up the first area where Turtle Talk showed. However, they end up leaving the screen up and running to this day. A kids' exploration area called Bruce's Shark World will also end up replacing the area of the sea base where all the technological aspects of ocean exploration had previously been shown. The new ride and fresh Pixar characters were a hit with families, and got a good reception. Good enough for Disney to take the dark ride over to the submarines at Disneyland and just retrofit it into that existing ride system. Back at Epcot though, it's important to remember that this whole reason for Project Gemini and Turtle Talk was an overwhelming perception that at the time, Epcot wasn't a park for kids. The Seas with Nemo and Friends stood out as a kid-friendly addition to a park that desperately needed something in that realm. However, as time went on and Epcot changed, so did the pavilion's perception. Since the Nemo takeover was completed in 2006, you might expect some moderate changes since then, especially with the major Epcot transformation that was announced back in 2017. In reality though, the Seas with Nemo and Friends didn't get much, if any, love from the reimagination. The biggest change was the official name of the pavilion changing to just the Seas instead of the Seas with Nemo and Friends. However, you'd be hard-pressed to know that if you were just looking at the pavilion itself. Additionally, when Future World got divided up, it ended up as a part of the World Nature neighborhood. It also ended up gaining a new neighbor in Journey of Water inspired by Moana, and the Moana meet and greet that came with it. Then finally, at the end of the whole transformation project, the pavilion got repainted back to its original beige instead of the blue that came with Nemo. Other than that, we're at the current version of the Seas Pavilion, for better or for worse. So then what's my issue with the Seas Pavilion as it stands today? Well, for starters, I don't want it to get misconstrued. I love Seabase Alpha, and I think it's something so incredibly unique and interesting. If Animal Kingdom has proven anything, it's that live animals have an appeal to guests that a lot of other entertainment offerings just don't. People of all ages love to see and learn about the creatures that they share the earth with. However, the Seas Pavilion doesn't reach its full potential anymore. When you hear people talk about Epcot, are they mentioning the seas? Probably not. I've talked to a lot of my friends who are more casual Disney guests, and a lot of them didn't even know that Epcot had an aquarium, let alone one of the largest in the world to this day. At the same time though, these people immediately put that as a must-do next time they come and visit. So where does the Seas miss the mark in 2025? Well, for starters, it's held back by the dark ride. Now, not all this is the ride's fault, but it certainly doesn't help that the ride is one of the most forgettable at the resort by this point. This whole video idea actually came up from talking with friends about our least favorite Disney rides, and eventually Nemo came up, and there wasn't really any pushback on it. At the time though, the ride did do a decent job at adding a family attraction to a park that desperately needed it, and retrofitting it into an extremely constricting area. But it just doesn't draw in the guests in modern Epcot with rides like Frozen Ever After and Remy's Ratatouille Adventure. In 2025, The Seas with Nemo and Friends is a poorly paced, screen-based book report ride that doesn't utilize its unique setting and location to its advantage. While the Caribbean Coral Reef Ride wasn't a show-stopping dark ride by any stretch of the imagination, that wasn't really its goal. The goal of that ride was simply to be the final act of the pre-show that brought guests from the hydrolators into Sea Base Alpha with unique views of inside the giant aquarium. This is paired with the layout of the pavilion, forcing the ride to be better than just okay. The Seas Pavilion truly appears like it's just a ride and nothing else. It's not clear that the ride leads to a whole pavilion of activities and experiences. In a lot of ways, it's actually very similar to Mission Space, which opened just before the Nemo overlay came into effect. Except, instead of a small interactive area targeted at kids, it's one of the world's largest aquariums. Meanwhile, over at the land, it ended up with a clone of Soarin' over California around the same time, which better complemented the whole pavilion and enticed more guests to ride Living with the Land. And if Soarin' wasn't a hit on the East Coast, the pavilion wouldn't have taken a hit to its foot traffic. At the Seas, any dip in ridership to the dark ride meant a dip in foot traffic to the sea base. This was only exacerbated by the novelty of Turtle Talk with Crush wearing off. While it's still popular, it rarely fills its theater, and it isn't the draw at Epcot that it once was. Turtle Talk and the Dark Ride are not big enough draws to bring in a high volume of guests to the Seas in 2025. The Living Seas was purpose-built to tell a story and bring guests in beyond just the ride that happened to be a part of the story. Through multiple pre-shows, the Living Seas was able to instill a sense of mystery and intrigue that built as guests moved along, and led to the reveal of Sea Base Alpha as the main attraction of the pavilion. This slow burn was essential to make the sea base cool for guests of all ages and bring guests to the exhibits and not the exit. Without this very intentional and specific layout of the pavilion entrance, you lose a lot of what made the sea base so impressive. Beyond the ride itself, the pavilion has lost a lot of the kinetic and atmospheric energy that it once had. Ever since COVID, we've lost the diver lockout shows that used to bring life to the center of the base and provide something that not even most aquariums could bring to guests. We've also lost the dolphin exhibit and upcharge encounter that came with them, for good reason, but they leave big shoes to be filled in the tank. It's also become a rarity to see Diving Mickey or other divers in the tank interacting with guests through the glass and building that connection through the tank. This energy helped make the sea base not feel as cold as it does when they're missing. Because everything is so sectioned off into modules, you need energy to radiate out of each module and into the main atrium to draw guests in. Outside the walls of the pavilion, the Seas was a clear guinea pig for inserting IP into Epcot, and I think it shows. While Nemo was an extremely natural fit, it ended up feeling more like a coat of paint in a new ride than a complete reinvention. For better or for worse, replacing the Energy Pavilion with a completely fictional Guardians Pavilion at least allowed Disney to go all out on the ride and create a fan favorite attraction, even if it's a stretch to fit into Epcot's overall narrative. As Iger took control of Disney and IP became the requirement at the parks, Imagineering adapted and ended up learning best practices, but Nemo didn't have the advantage of trial and error. Additionally, adding in the Journey of Water inspired by Moana right next door along with the meet and greet only goes to take guests away from the Seas more. I think it makes guests see the area as one big water-inspired zone and further view the Seas as just the Nemo ride, which is, at this point, skippable. So, what can Disney do to bring people back to the Seas and capitalize on the true potential of Pavilion again? Well, for starters, I am woefully unqualified with my film and PR degree, so please take all of these suggestions with enough grains of salt to soak up the ocean. With that out of the way, the first thing I think the pavilion needs is a way to enter it without riding Nemo. When the dark ride was just a segment of the pre-shows, it served its purpose and guests were entering the pavilion to experience the sea base and not the ride itself. Now, if guests aren't interested in riding Nemo, they have to walk upstream through an exit tucked away in the far corner of Epcot if they want to get into the sea base. If Disney was able to create a slip path at the entrance of the pavilion, allowing guests to choose to either ride the ride or walk through into the sea base, it would help guests realize there's more than just the ride. Plus, this could also be an opportunity to bring back some form of the narrative pre-show to entering the sea base, similar to how the hydrolators used to. While the Nemo queue does try to establish that you're going under the water, I hesitate to say that most guests would notice this in the same way that the previous setup did. And while the queue is well themed, it is a lot longer than the ride warrants now. Creating a secondary entrance out front would help de-emphasize Nemo while not removing him entirely. This could help draw guests in from the more recent and more popular Moana attractions nearby. The next thought is modernizing the Nemo ride itself. Now, I understand how difficult of a space it is to work in and the constraints of the ride system. However, I still think it's worth it to revisit the screens and some of those more empty scenes to improve them and bring them more in line with the rest of Epcot's rides. I also would love to see the windows returned in the EAC scene and something new done there. I think the idea of a speed tunnel was good, but being so close to the walls makes the effects not work as well nearly 2 decades later. I don't expect Disney to completely reinvent the ride itself given the circumstances, however, some TLC is definitely needed. Now, inside of the sea base, I think Disney should take the opportunity to really bring edutainment to guests in a more show format versus right now where they expect guests to approach cast members regularly. Bringing life and shows to the center of Sea Base Alpha will help guests disperse throughout the exhibits and encourage curiosity. While the return of the lockout is likely a stretch at this point, utilizing that area as a stage of sorts to entertain and utilize the characters of Finding Nemo themselves would bring a cohesion and a classic Epcot edutainment feel back. Now, my last idea involves one aspect of the pavilion that I actually haven't talked about yet. The Coral Reef restaurant located in the pavilion was once seen as the highlight of Epcot dining, but it's kind of now one of the most overlooked restaurants in the resort as a whole. Now, I don't really eat seafood, so I can't really judge that quality, but the 2 times I've eaten here, the chicken and plant-based options have been really good, and I wouldn't hesitate to return, especially with the unique atmosphere of being able to look into the tank as you eat your meal. Now, one thing I think could improve Coral Reef and bring people to give it a shot is renovating the back row of tables into a walk-up bar, similar to Space 220, allowing guests to get a taste of the menu or just a beverage without the commitment of a reservation. Now I know Epcot doesn't really need more bars, but also I want an indoor bar with seating and AC and the ability to just watch the tank while sipping on a beverage. There's a lot more things that I'm sure can be done to help improve the seas and bring it back to the integral part of Epcot it once was. And I hope Disney does end up investing in, maintaining this pavilion. At the end of the day, the Seas Pavilion isn't bad, it's just forgotten. In a park as big and expansive as Epcot, it got lost in the shuffle, being re-themed in the middle of the park's most directionless time. This caused it to be overlooked by the average guest and mostly ignored by Disney. I think the potential this pavilion still has is immense and wouldn't require a major overhaul to bring it back to the forefront of guests' minds. I think the Seas could easily find itself in a similar spot to its sister pavilion, the Land, as a remnant of early Epcot that can be kept modern and interesting to guests of all ages, even as the rest of the park around it changes. I hope with the changes coming to the Disney parks in the coming years, Disney doesn't forget about Epcot and the Seas. Thank you so much for watching this video. I genuinely appreciate it. I don't have much else to add at this point. There's only so much you can talk about with the Seas, but it was really interesting going into the pavilion a lot and getting all the B-roll for this, and just seeing how people take in the pavilion, and it actually ended up helping shape this video a lot more than I expected. So anyways, I hope you liked this video, and I can't wait to share the next one with you.
Today's the day! The sun is shining, the tank is clean, and we are getting out of... The tank is clean.